I know, but you get the feeling was have my little kid on me. Although someone in one where we were, a girl went flying in, not church though, went flying into the wall.
Herself. The book, she broke a leg.
Not very nice way.
Yes, it's on YouTube. It's live on YouTube. Is it?
What? Have you watched it after? We need to make a new thing.
Hey, one.
Don't we? Huh?
Good evening, Yehuda.
We'll have to find a way today.
I can hear you.
I love Yehuda's here. How are you, Yehuda?
Good, Baruch Hashem. Yourself?
He's not talking to you.
No, we're all talking to you.
I just assume you're talking to me.
Yeah, we are talking to you. It's nice. We're missing you here. We're looking forward to you joining us live. Not live.
You've been vaccinated. Come back.
Have you been vaccinated? Maybe
Not yet.
you're already in.
And then COVID's going to disappear. COVID's going to be gone by January the 6th.
Okay. We're up to Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. A lot of topics. Let's get going. 10 lines from the top. The Mishnah tells us a list of chomutz v'tavuvos and chomutz nuksha. We'll go into more details soon. Chomutz v'tavuvos is chomutz, which is a mixture of chomutz and non-chomutz items. And chomutz nuksha is chomutz which is not so edible to eat. And the Mishnah concludes that anything which has chomutz inside it is a lo yisaseh. So the Gemara asks the obvious question: if you're going to tell me the general rule, you do not need to tell me the details. The Gemara says, "Zeh haklar, kol shumim min dagam." Tanya, Omar b'Yeshua, v'chim achas sheshoninu. Since the Mishnah told us kol shumim min dagam, anything which is a min dagam as over b'Pesach, that you get malchus on Pesach. Lo mamonu chacham meseilu. So why is the Mishnah need to tell us? Why is the Mishnah tell us kutach habavi, seisman, mitzi, and all the rest of them? And each time we have to work out what's in the recipe. And then afterwards we work out what the chomutz. Just say anything which is a chomutz, it is asa, or full stop. Answers the Gemara. A person needs to know what they are. Many times he might not be aware that there's chomutz. Now this is nafkimina for Pesach, and the Gemara is going to give an example. It's not nafkimina for Pesach; it's nafkimina for during the year. Because the Gemara says, somebody from Eretz Yisrael, Ikra the Bava went to Bava, have a bissa bad day, he had a piece of meat. He said to them, matkilta, give me a dip, right? He was having some meat, he said, please can I have a dip? So they said, oh, we'll give you kutach hababli as a nice dip. Now, had he not known what kutach hababli had, and he would have just said, he would have dipped his meat inside it. Kiva the shoma kutach pirish, he separated, which really they shouldn't really point out. This is not the example which we're trying to bring an example for chomutz on Pesach, but it's the same concept. David, I noticed there was a Gemara there just as you go past the door on the table. As you go past the door, that I think is the right one. Again, so the right so like this. The Ikar Halacha is you only need to know two things: chomutz nuksha and chomutz v'tavuvos. Why have a long list? Answer: because the more details you know, the less likely you'll be nichshal ba'aveil. And the Gemara gives an example, not legabe chomutz, but Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, 20 lines from the top. Guessing.
That was a quick bad line.
The Beis again. So the Mishnah gives a list of different products in order that the person should be aware. A person has to know which things are forbidden, which things are permitted. So the Gemara gives an example of kutach habavli, which is a milky product, but the same would hold true by a chomutz product. Okay. We're going to now go a little bit more into chomutz v'tavuvos, etc. Let's say a few details. I want to read out, if you've got the ability to look at it. Rashi says, what's the word for it? If you've got it, it's the fourth from the bottom of the thin lines of Rashi. Just that one, because Rashi, for some reason there, puts into detail. The thin lines of Rashi, fourth from the end of the thin lines of Rashi. Rashi said a few places. Rashi says over there, Kutach v'sheicha v'chometz v'zeisam, kulam chometz gamu m'or v'hen, papa chometz. Kitach kepas, badach kesari. There's wheat and barley. The kulum b'nei achila v'shtininu, everybody likes to eat and drink them. Ava zimun v'amir on the kolam, the noik shahu, ube'ene, it's not a mixture, but it's proper chometz without a mixture. Hoyel v'la b'nei achila ninu, loitoninu, it didn't mention them. Okay, there's a seal over here. The Rashi splits the Mishnah into two categories. The first four are chometz b'taruvas. The last three are chometz noiksha, and here's one of the places that the Rashi says the chometz noiksha is lav b'nei achilaninu. We mentioned already yesterday the Magen Avraham says it can't possibly mean. If you look earlier, Rashi also says it in that very long Rashi Shiur. Rashi towards the end says the noiksha in a royo la'achila. It's not royo la'achila, but again, what does it mean in a royo la'achila? If it's not edible at all, then it's not chometz. It means it's not easy to eat, it's not palatable. That's a very hard to define what's not la'achila. Now we have a concept called sa'oi and si'oi, and they almost sound exactly the same, they almost spelled exactly the same, and they're two completely different things, unfortunately, and it's easy to get mixed up. Sa'oi is bread, a dough. In the olden days we wanted yeast, nowadays we use chemicals, and the chemicals do not even have chometz inside it. You can get kosher Pesach yeast, right? I know myself, kosher Pesach. I know myself because I don't eat any of the 5 minim, and yet we buy yeast regularly. Yeast, that, but the olden days they didn't have chemical yeast. Okay, we'll talk about that. Right. So again, so what did they do in the olden days? How did you get your bread to rise? Bread doesn't rise so easily. You make a dough. You leave it for a very, very long time, for days and days and days. And then what happens is you take a small amount of it and you add it to your dough, and that becomes, yes, Yehuda, that becomes what? That makes it chometz. Now that's sa'oi. Is it geschmack to eat? No. Is one chayv kos?
That's possibly Thursday then, yeah.
Oh. Now that's the question, because we said so now the chometz noiksha, which is inedible chometz, is only allowed. There's no kos. So why is the kos over here? Very good. It's chaval to miss this, because if you miss this, the whole next Gemara is very difficult. But Emes, you're right. That it's chometz noiksha, but it's not geschmack to eat. Since it's not geschmack to eat, therefore it's considered it's chometz noiksha. But since the Torah specifically said se'oi, therefore one is chayv kos. Now we have something else called se'oi. Sounds exactly the same. It's spelled the same. It's completely different. Se'oi is dough which has not completely risen. There are 3 levels to a dough when it completely rises. Level number 1 is before it completely rises, it changes color. It gets into a more pale white. After that, little cracks come into the dough, like the horns of locusts. It's called kanei chagavim, tiny little cracks. Eventually, the cracks become so many that they integrate with each other, and the crisscross lines come. The Mishnah tells us that se'oi is chometz noiksha. Why is se'oi chometz noiksha? One does not get kos for it. Why is se'oi chometz noiksha? One doesn't get kos. Does anybody know?
Not edible.
Because it's not edible, and it's not the se'oi which the Torah was talking about. So therefore, it's only a lab, and there's no kos. Is it clear? Now, there's a machlekes from Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. At which of these stages is it called se'oi? According to Rameir, he's more machmir. You have to memorize all this. According to Rameir, he's more machmir. Once a dough becomes pale white, it's already chometz noiksha, it's already se'oi, and you get malchus. Once it has cracks, it is proper chometz, one is chav kos. That's from Meir. Rabbi Yehuda is more maker. He says, changing the color lighter white is not even a chometz at all, and one is allowed to eat it min ha'Torah. With Rabbanan, they said you shouldn't eat it. If it gets cracks, then that you get malchus. That's only lav. Once it gets interlaced completely, the cracks are so many that they crisscross each other, then it is real chometz. Right. So now, in our Mishnah, the Mishnah talks about 2 separate things. The Mishnah says chometz noiksha, which is chometz, which is proper chometz, not a mixture of chometz, but it's not geschmack to eat, and chometz betaruvus, which means that chometz, which is proper chometz, but it's in a mixture. In both of these cases, our Tanavah Mishnah holds that you get malchus. Lemaisa, halacha lemaisa, you should be aware, not everybody agrees with this. Tosfos himself, some say that you don't get malchus, it's only allowed. Some say that it's only a D'Rabbanan. It's only a D'Rabbanan. Some say it's even less than a D'Rabbanan. Now, our Mishnah clearly holds, as we pointed out, there's two lists. One is Chametz B'Tov, it's Chametz Nuksha. The Gemara wants to establish who holds of our Mishnah. So let's see more inside. If you remember all the Akdamas, it'll be much easier. Ha'ilu Ba'azor. We're up to Mem Gimel Mud Aleph, about 20 lines from the top, by the two dots. Ha'ilu Ba'azor. Man Tana de Chametz Gomo, Dogon Gomo Lidei Taruvas. That proper Chametz, which is a mixture, for example, Kutach Hababli, where you've got milk, salt, and bread, which is a mixture. Be'nuksha be'ene, or Chametz Nuksha as is. What's Chametz Nuksha as is? Give me an example. Well, I said they were glue. Now, Mishnah, we talk about glue, right? Glue or paint. And then both of these cases, belav, you get a marcus. Omav Yoda Marav Ramehi. It's a Ramehi, the Tanya. We learned a Beis. Now, this Beis is a very troubling Beis. And to explain this Beis, you really have to remember. I'm going to go once more very, very quickly. Se'oi is a form of Chametz Nuksha because it's still that has a completely risen. There are three stages. When it gets a pale white, when it gets small cracks, when it gets many cracks. Rameya holds it gets pale white, it's already osad chametz nuksha. When it gets cracks, it's a proper chametz. Rabbi says pale white, it is mutter. Cracks, it is chametz nuksha. Interlacing cracks, it's chametz gomor deraisa. Yes, that's chametz gomor. Very good. Yes, everybody agrees. The Tanya say what? Rabbi Yehuda. Nothing. It's mutter. You can eat it. Midoraisa, midorabanan you can't. The Tanya say you did this before. You just remember. Oh, what? The Tanya say you sorry if say needs to be burnt. Burnt, by the way. Does that mean that you're allowed to get hana or not allowed to get hana? By the way, you're not allowed to get hana. What's your raya? Yes, because if you're allowed to get hana, you don't need to burn it. You can use it to put under your chair or to give it to your dog. The fact that it says burning it means the essence of burning means you're not allowed to get pleasure. But notice that the cowboy be allowed to give it to your dog, which that in itself is a contradiction. You say you burn it, be allowed to give it to your dog. If I'm allowed to give it to my dogs, why should I burn it? I might as well keep it and give it to my dogs. But if you eat it, you get 40 markers. Hogu kasha, it's self-contradictory. Almost you said so you saw it, so it should be burnt. I don't know about not. But don't even know if they carbon this and give it to your dog. It doesn't make any sense. Now this goes like this. Say Yisoref Duramir le Duramir. The stage of Seir according to Ramir, which is what? When it gets pale. According to Rameya, burn it. To Rabbi Yehuda, or the sale of Rabbi Yehuda, which is cracks. Stage 1, according to Rameya, burn it. Stage 2, to Rabbi Yehuda, le Rabbi Yehuda, then you should burn it again. Stage 1, according to Rameya, burn it. Stage 2, according to Rabbi Yehuda, burn it, because he holds that Chometz Nukshas Osabano. But when if they cowboy, you're allowed to get a no from it to Rameya, Rabbi Yehuda. Stage 1. According to which is according to Rameya, Chametz Nuksha, according to Rabbi Yehuda is what? Nothing. So you can give it to your dog. So then, Tes asked the kasha. Look at Tes, second bottom Tes. If they cover the Rabbi Yehuda, we do rice. I feel about chila shoy. They would pick up the chud. That's what they say. Let me do up on also. Tes says it. Says it's do up on it again. Let's get it clear. The Brisa says like this: burn it. That's referring to stage 1 according to Rameya, stage 2 according to Rabbi Yehuda, and then it carries on. Stage 1 according to Rabbi Yehuda. What should you do to it? Give it to your dog. You get 40 malchus. Also, the Rameh, that's going to Rameh. The Rameh says that once it is Chametz Nuksha, you get malchus. Rameh says, from this brisa, we can work out that some do eat se'oi, which we said is dough, which hasn't risen properly. It's either pale or it's just, what's the word for it? It's just got cracks. You get malchus. That means in our Mishnah we learn 2 chidushim. Chidush number 1 is that chametz betavuvas you get malchus, a mixture of chametz get malchus. Chidush number 2 is chametz that's not so palatable. For example, paint or glue, you get malchus. Says, well, who says such a thing? Who told us such a thing? Says, well, yes, we found it in a brisa. That brisa tells us essentially that se'oi, which is not se'oi, because se'oi one is chayav koros for, as we explained right at the beginning. But se'oi is very difficult. Unless in our first let's get this more. Get used to the idea that se'oi and se'oi are 2 completely different things. It's very hard. Se'oi is old leavened bread, which you use as yeast in the olden days. What's the din for it? And koros. Koros, even though it's not edible, because that's what the Torah says. Don't eat chametz and soy. Se'oi is bread which is not completely visible. No, everybody agrees it's chametz noiksho. The question is which stage it becomes se'oi. And what's the Beis to say you get malchus? So from that Beis, if somebody would say to chametz noiksho, what's the dim? What would you say? Malchus, because you see that se'oi which is chametz noiksho, it's not geschmack to eat, you get malchus. But that Beis doesn't breathe a word about chametz b'tavovos. It doesn't say a word about chametz b'tavovos, chametz which gets mixed in the mixture. So how do we know it? So Rabbi Yehuda was the one who was speaking over here, tells us that it's logical. What's the logic? He says like this: chametz noiksho is not geschmack to eat. It's not pleasant to eat. And now you get malchus, kal v'chayma chametz b'tavovos, which is pleasant to eat. If already chametz noiksho, you get malchus, kal v'chayma chametz b'tavovos. Do you agree? Do you agree with kal v'chayma? Okay, but at least you get malchus. If already chametz noiksho, which is not pleasant to eat, you get a lav. Kal v'chayma chametz b'tavovos, you get a lav. What? You hear the logic? One could argue with the logic. No. The chametz noiksho is chametz be'en. It's chametz without a mixture. You're taking a chametz noiksho be'en to kal v'chayma to chametz b'tavovos. Rabbi Yehuda holds that kal v'chayma is true. If you were to ask you, what's more likely to get malchus for? A mixture, a dip that has bread inside it, or proper chametz, which is not palatable? Which one would you say is more quality? According to Rabbi Yehuda, chametz noiksho is more lenient. And if already chametz noiksho get malchus, kal v'chayma chametz b'tavovos get malchus. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Comes along on Nachman and he argues, and he says the exact opposite: that if chametz b'tavovos you get malchus, then the chametz noiksho get malchus, because he understands that chametz b'tavovos is more lenient. So he says our Mishnah is not like Ramir, because you've got no raya from Ramir, because Ramir is about chametz noiksho. You've got no raya for the other case. Let's see more inside. Nachman Omar Abelez the Tanya al chametz dogon gomu onush koras. A mixture, chametz proper get koras. Ali ruvi belav div Abelezim. According to the Chachamim, if you eat a mixture of chametz, if you eat kutach habavli, according to the Chachamim, what's the din? According to the Chachamim in this brayso, if you eat kutach habavli, what do you get? This nothing. Let's read the brayso again. The Chachamim oimim chametz dogon gomu onush koras alei ruvoi beloi klum. You get nothing because it's tavuvos. Says Rav Nachman, "V'ashmino nelo ableze dama chametz dogon gomu alei tavuvos belav v'choshke niksha beini." Basically like this. Our Mishnah told us two halachas. Our Mishnah told us chametz b'tavuvos malchus, chametz niksha malchus. Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Nachman are each trying to establish who's our Mishnah going like. Rabbi Yehuda says it's like a mir that says chametz niksha is malchus. If already chametz niksha malchus, chametz b'tavuvos is malchus. Rav Nachman says the exact opposite. That it's going with shittas Rabbi Lezer. That's chametz b'tavuvos is malchus, kavachim chametz niksha. That means each one, both Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Nachman, only found the brayso that says one halacha of the two. Our Mishnah says two halachas, and each one works out one from the other, and each one works out the opposite of the other. That means like this. The question is only which one's worse. Is chametz niksha worse or is chametz b'tavuvos worse? According to Rabbi Yehuda, chametz b'tavuvos is worse, and he only found a brayso that took chametz niksha, and he made a kavachim chametz niksha is chametz b'tavuvos. What? They both agree that our Mishnah says you get malchus, but it won't be. There would be a machlokes if you find, for example, in the second brayso it says the Chachamim say that you don't get anything for chametz b'tavuvos. According to Rabbi Yehuda, was the first opinion. He holds that chametz b'tavuvos is the worst of all. So therefore, if you don't get malchus for chametz b'tavuvos, then you won't get chametz b'niksha either. That means again, the Mishnah says two halachas. Both cases you get malchus. Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Nachman are both arguing who's the Tana that says the halachas of our Mishnah. They each found one Tana who only says one of the halachas. No, only says one of the halachas. Rabbi Meir talked about chametz niksha. Rabbi Lezer talked about chametz b'tavuvos, and each one made a kavachim to that. And the more elaborates a little bit. But Rabbi Nachman, my Tamalomakav, Yodom Alochtim Ad Kanukama Meosman and Niksha Beine. That's only talk about chametz which is by itself. Other chametz talking gomal de tavuvos. Maybe they don't get malchus. Rabbi Yehuda ma'atam lo kav nachman amalach ad kam lekov leza also lo chametz talking gomal de tavuvos. Only chametz which is through a mixture. Aber niksha beine, if it's a mixture by itself, it's not palatable. Lo yoma, I never said it. Okay. So we've got machlokes, what is worse, and everybody from the place Shiur to Chomasman, and everybody tries to explain what is the logic between the machlokes. How can they argue? How can one man don't want to say that chametz gomo is worse, another one which is in a mixture, another one says chametz nugsha is worse? If the Yeshua and the Tzlach both say the same kind of logic, and that is like this: we're going to learn a machlokas later when you have a mixture of heter and issa, how to view it. Machlokas tanoi. Do we say, or actually machlokas tanoi, I should say, machlokas when you have a mixture? He says that is the essence of this machlokas over here. If we see a mixture as something which is as bad as the essence itself, so obviously chametz gomel b'tavuvos is worse than chametz nugsha, because the fact that it's a mixture, we hardly care about it. If you say that a mixture nullifies it, minato, and therefore it's considered as if it's not there, so the chametz nugsha is worse. So the machlokas, what is worse, chametz nugsha, chametz b'tavuvos, it depends what it does, what the tavuvos does. Okay. Tanya Kavos Rav Yehuda. We're going to go a little bit into two psukim of the Torah. Kedai, if you've got the psukim in front of you, I'll read the psukim once and then hopefully remember them. Torah says like this: Kol machmetzes, all machmetzes lo yiseichelu, you shall not eat. Okay, that is one pasuk. And then he says another pasuk: Shivas yomim se'orei matzeh b'bateichem. I'm not reading the whole pasuk before. Ki chol oichel machmetzes, anybody eats machmetzes. We've got two psukim that say you mustn't eat machmetzes. If you want to go really, because it's important for the diktuk, one pasuk says kol machmetzes, all machmetzes don't eat. The next pasuk says kol oichel machmetzes, anybody who eats machmetzes will get kols. Both psukim use the word kol and they use the word machmetzes. If you're very good at diktuk, you'll see clearly there's a very fundamental difference between the two psukim. One of them is saying kol machmetzes, all forms of machmetzes. The all is referring to all forms of that chametz. The other pasuk says kol oichel machmetzes is referring to the people, the person who's eating any form of person. Let's say I'd say to you, a woman allowed to eat chametz. Which pasuk? And let's say I'd say to you, they're not. Which pasuk? Oh, why? Because the pasuk is kol oichel machmetzes. Anybody who eats machmetzes. The first pasuk is not referring to the eaters. It's referring to that which is being eaten. Kol machmetzes, all machmetzes should be eaten. It's very important for later in the Gemara. We're going to go through these two psukim, and we have to remember we have a machlokas tanoim regarding these halachas of chametz nugsha and chametz b'tavuvos, and we have to see how these halachas are learned from the psukim. So let's go inside. Tanya Kavos Rav Yehuda. Kol machmetzes lo yiseichelu, all machmetzes levabos. Kutach hababli v'sheich ramodi v'chametz adom v'zeis hamitzri, which we learned yesterday. Does anybody remember the ingredients of all of them? Kutach hababli is what? Moldy bread, milk, and salt. Sheikh Hamadi is date beer with barley. You added barley to it. Chametz adomi is wine which you added barley. Zeisma mitzvi is a mixture of barley, saffron, and salt. Okay. Yochel ye'onish kolos. Yochel ye'onish kolos. I come to you for supper, Moshe. I want to get this foods. Yochel ye'onish kolos. You might have thought you get kolos. Tamud b'ma koloichel machometz v'nichveso. Al chometz dogan gomu onish kolos v'ala ruvoi belav. There's no kolos. It's only a lav. So if you eat chashon person, it's good to chabavli on Pesach. It's only a lav, not kolos. Man shomas leidam ala ruvoi belav. Who says it's a lav of blessing? He didn't mention anything about Nuksha. That means, before we add the Machlekas, who's the Tan of our Mishnah? Is it Rabbi Yehuda? Is it Rabbi Meir or is it Rabbi Lezer? Rabbi Yehuda said it's Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Nachman said it's Rabbi Lezer. Because our Mishnah actually told us two things. It told us Chometz Nuksha, Chometz B'tavuvos. Each one found a brisa that only discusses one thing. Says the Gemara from this brisa, which is Shittas Rabbi Lezer, and it only talks about chometz and nuksha. Sorry, chometz b'tavuvos. It doesn't mention anything about chometz and nuksha. Is a raya that Rabbi Lezer does not hold of chometz and nuksha. I just want to say, I know it's a complicated question from Marshal, but it's managed from the fundamental pshat in this Gemara. The obvious question is, all the brises only talked about one thing. Both of them brought a brise of a Tana that's only talked about one thing. One brought a chometz and nuksha, one brought chometz and b'tavuvos. What did we see in this brise any more than the previous brises? Every brise so far was just one Tana saying one halacha, and each one inferred another. The answer is because in this brisa, it also tells us you might have thought there should be kops. Look, let's see the Tosfos, a third from the bottom. But Nachman told us, don't need to say it, it's Kavachima. In the previous prices, the chiddush of the brisa was that there is a lab. So the brisa told us one, and you can infer the other. In this brisa, besides for the chiddush that is a lab, the brisa does us another chiddush, that there's no cause. According to Rav Nachman, that one is more chomer than the other, the brisa should have told us the chiddush that there's no cause, even Achaman's Nuksha. And the brisa doesn't say that. And therefore, if the brisa thought it was a kavachim and Achaman's Nuksha is worse, says the Marsha, the brisa would have then finished off that even the Achaman's Nuksha has no cause. That other two brisas weren't really busy with cause, only busy with the lab. So once it tells you that one has a lab, you can infer the other. But this brisa is trying to tell you another chiddush, that there's no cause. If Achaman's Nuksha is much worse, it should have told you that there's no cause in such a case. The fact that brisa doesn't tell you is why the Achaman's Nuksha doesn't exist. Okay. Says the Gemara. Now we're going back to this halacha. So what's Rabbi Eliezer hold? That Achaman's b'tavuvas is a lav and there's no cause. How does he know there's a lav? Because the Torah says, "Kol machmetzas lo yisechil." Rabbi Eliezer, how does he know there's a lav? Except kol machmetzas lo yisechil. Yochi kos nami lechayev. Why we have another pasuk to Oksiv? Ki kol oichel machmetzas v'nichraso. That anybody eats machmetzas gets cause. If you're saying kol oichel kol machmetzas, and kol machmetzas coming to include a mixture, so kol oichel machmetzas v'nichraso. One pasuk says cause, one pasuk says a lav. And if you're saying that kol is referring to including a mixture, the other pasuk should be including a mixture and therefore telling you that you have this cause. Says the Gemara, machmetzes you might have thought is only something that comes chometz on its own. What happens if something becomes chometz through outside influence? For example, Rashi mentioned in a couple of places that if you put grape peels, Yehuda, in the bakery, do they use grape peels to make things rice? Well, nowadays they're probably better, sophisticated, more things. In the old days, used to use old grape peels to make things right. So you might have thought there's no chometz. Why is there no chometz? Because it didn't come from flour and water. The chamitzus came from the grapes. If you're taking back and you're saying kol machmetzes, it's not telling you that you're chayav for a mixture. It's telling you that you're chayav even for grape-induced chometz. So therefore, the first part which says kol machmetzes, you had to know it's referring to a mixture of chometz. Maybe it's referring to this din of chometz which came from a grape. And the Talmud Rav Eliezer be called Rav Eliezer is from all, not from the word machmetzes, because machmetzes teaches you something which is chometz through something else. It comes from the word kol. Says the Gemara, the other pasuk says it's kol. That means the Gemara keeps contrasting the two psukim, and it's very difficult. Rabbi Eliezer says that if a person eats chometz with a mixture, chayav malchus, but no cause. Why? Because the pasuk says kol machmetzes leisechelu, kol including a mixture. Furthermore, but the same exact words is used in another pasuk, and the pasuk finishes off v'nichus, so it gets cause. And if the word kol machmetzes means to tell you that a mixture is chayav, so for the next pasuk which tells you that it's chayav cause, is referring to the mixture. Says the Gemara, no. Ahuri boilin Rabbi says anoshim, that's coming to include women. Says the Gemara, women to tell you they're not allowed to eat chometz. Of course, they're not allowed to eat chometz. Noshim v'daviud amarav nafka. Doma aviud amarav v'chein toned be'av Yisroel omar kol isha ki yasib kol chadas ha'adam. A man or woman that do any avera hishva kosav ish the isha. The Torah, by putting them both in the same breath, teaches us the kol inshin should be told that a woman has all the lavim. Let's remember this. When it comes to Naseh, there's a difference between Naseh, which is Mangoma and Eras Mangoma. When it comes to Loisa, there's no difference. I saw a fascinating Pnei Yeshua in Kedushin. Couldn't believe it. Yeshua asks the Kasha, why in the world would you have thought that a woman is allowed to eat chometz or anything, or chazer? I don't know. I'm surprised by his answer. The question is very strong. But why would you have thought such a thing? So he says like this, because the Torah says, and the Chassidut says, that when you speak to men, you speak harshly. You speak to women, you speak gently and tell them the good, they're positive. So therefore, maybe women were never given all these harsh commandments because they would be put off. Kamash malon. No, all that. Okay. So the Beis, let's go to summarize what we've learned. The Torah says kol oichel machmetzes is coming to include a mixture of chometz. Furthermore, if it's coming to include a mixture of chometz, so that it should also come to tell you cause for nichlasot. One says no. That other pasuk is not talking about mixture of chometz. It's talking about women. Says what it's so the Gemara asks, why did the pasuk to include women? Women are also in all kinds of averos. It's no, we need it. Top of them, gimel on the base, soft line. The Torah puts in the same pasuk the issa to eat chometz with the mitzvah to eat matzah, and we know that women should be potter from eating matzah. Why should women be potter from eating matzah? Because this is a shalan geromo. all mitzvahs which are time dependent, women are potter from. So kol sheyesh to become achol matzah, yesh b'atoich al chometz, anything which has got a chiyuv matzah. Then there's an isatit chometz. Dani noshi, these women are blessed to become achol matzah, since there shouldn't be chai matzah. Dav the mitzvahs leishvan gavomo, eva b'atoich al chometz nami desnu, kamash malom. That means, let's go slowly but surely. We have two psukim koleichel machmetzes. One was to tell you the mixture, that even the mixture is also for love. Another one says, well, not to tell you kos, but to tell you that women are chayv kos. Furthermore, why in the world should women be potter from kos? The chayv order is not allowed to eat chazah, they're not allowed to do malachas on Shabbos. Answer. Because the Torah tells us the issa of chometz with the mitzvah of matzah. So you might have thought that the issa of chometz and matzah are dependent on each other. And just like women should be part of the mitzvah of matzah, why? Because mitzvah says about geroma. So too, women should be part of the chometz. That's why we need a special pasuk to tell us by chometz that no, the women are not to eat chometz. The hashta desvabu lehu b'ba'atoich al chometz is something like achilas matzah k'rabbe lezed. Oh, Rabbe lezed, noshim chayavis v'achilas matzah t'va'atoich shenema le'isichel of chometz v'chulu kol shesh b'atoich al chometz yesh v'achilas matzah. The hani noshi, these women nami hoi v'yesh b'atoich al chometz yesh k'machol matzah. They're not allowed to eat chometz, so therefore they have to eat matzah. That means yes. Oh, is a woman mechuyev to eat matzah first night Pesach? Does anybody know? Yes. How do we know? Because the Torah says, don't eat chometz, eat matzah. Originally, we would have said, since we're not potter for matzah, because this is man gomer, they're allowed to eat chometz. But now that we have a special pasuk, what's the special pasuk? Koleichel machmetzes, to tell you that women are not allowed to eat chometz. So now we'll go back the other way around, and we say, anybody who's not allowed to eat chometz has to eat matzah. So women have to eat matzah. So what happens like this? The more ask the question, why do we need a pasuk to tell us that women shouldn't eat chometz? At the end of the day, women are not allowed to do any of the lavim. The answer is because it's the Torah juxtapositions puts chometz and matzah together. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, just like matzah the pot, also chometz the pot. Says, well, no, let's do it the other way around. Now that we've learned that chometz they're also, so therefore the mechuyev in matzah as well, and that's how we know that we wouldn't have to eat matzah on Pesach. There's a few hours of it. There's a famous Meiri. Meiri says over here, very important, you study tell it to your wives, your daughters, that why a woman part of this Asishman Goma? Because what they're doing is even more important. Looking after a household is even more important. People sometimes think people think that it's a chison. It's not. You get very disturbed when they write biographies of big tzaddikim, women. They write that they used to go to shul shachas with the chamayim. When the Sklievsky book came out, I was very happy to see that he writes them. That till her children grew up, she never went to shul.
Never went to?
Shul. She never went to shul till the children all left the house. And in fact, the Chazon Ish's wife never went to shul. It's interesting because a person has to be aware. It's not sometimes women feel that they have to copy men. It's a mistake. They think, let's forget. Because what they're doing is even more important than what was just like wrong. The Sefer by Yisroel Zilberstein, who says over here that he asks people a riddle, and he got it from his father-in-law, who was Rabbi Yashiv. And this riddle, he asks people, almost nobody ever gets it. And I have to admit that he himself, I'm not even sure if the riddle is true, but it's a funny riddle. When do you have a man and a woman sitting in the sukkah, and only the woman makes a bracha leisha b'sukkah? No, you still make a bracha leisha b'sukkah. It's very complicated. The halacha is, he says this on this Gemara. The halacha is that is a woman mechuyev to sit in the sukkah, by the way? No, why? Mitzvah seishvan gom. Mitzvah seishvan gom. The man is mechuyev. If a person sits inside the sukkah, every part of his body, but his table is in the house, has him come mitzvah sukkah? No. With Rabbanon, they took away the mitzvah because they were scared they would lean over and eat. So they said that even though in Hatayr you sit in the sukkah with Rabbanon, they took away the mitzvah completely. Why? Because they're scared you might eat in the house. A woman is allowed to eat in the house. So for her, they didn't have that gezerah. So if a man and a woman are sitting in the sukkah and the table inside the house, the man can't make a bracha because the chum took it away from him. But the woman can make a bracha because at the end of the day, she's sitting in the sukkah. What? Can't be Muslim, no. That's her? Ask the people. It's a very hard... right. It's a funny riddle. He asks it. Right. Tesis goes through that if that's the case, he asks the kasha, why should women not be chayv tzitzis? Because the Torah puts mitzvah tzitzis and kilayim next to each other, and we should say that women are chayv in kilayim should be chayv in tzitzis. This is that shver. But no, but it's not the same mitzvah of chametz on matzah. Just the Torah puts it together.
The mitzvah is not to work it out.
Right. Oh yeah. Mitzvah don't use chametz in matzah. The Torah says where it says it's still working out. Okay. There's a few questions to ask about sukkah, but okay, let's go to a bit more. Okay. I want to summarize what we learned. According to Rabbi Lezer, if you eat chametz b'tavuvas, what do you get? Chametz b'tavuvas, what do you get? Malchus and no cause. According to the Chachamim, what do you get? No Malchus, no cause. The Torah says, Kol machmetzes lo yisechedu. Kol machmetzes, the word machmetzes teaches us what? No. What's machmetzes teach you? Bread that rose through grapes and things like that, not from its own things. Kol machmetzes teaches you, what's the kol machmetzes teach you? Even the taruvas, even in a mixture. So kol machmetzes lo yisechedu, a mixture of chametz, malchus. For the Gemara, what do you mean? If there's malchus, I'll tell you there's another pasuk. That's one pasuk in one place. I'll find you another pasuk elsewhere in the Torah. The Torah says, Kol oichel machmetzes v'nichvaso, that anybody eats machmetzes gets koros. So according to your logic, that kol is coming to include taruvas chametz. So kol oichel machmetzes should teach you that what? That if you eat taruvas chametz get koros. Answers the Gemara that kol oichel machmetzes is coming to teach you that what? Women are chayiv. Why would you think women are part it's allowed? Answer because we learn from matzah. And once we learn from matzah, we learn the other way around that the women are chayiv and matzah. For the Gemara, that doesn't work. Why in one place do you say kol machmetzes leisechelu and we say it's referring to taruvas chametz, and another place the Torah says kol oichel machmetzes and you're saying it's not referring to taruvas chametz, it's not referring to a mixture of chametz. What is it referring to? Women. Make up your mind. Is kol machmetzes referring to a mixture of chametz, or is it referring to kol oichel machmetzes referring to women? Which way around is it? Says, well, my chazas died kolibu noshim or mafkese ruvoi. How? What made you say that this pasuk, the second pasuk, is referring to women, and it's not talking about a mixture? That there's no cause by mixture. Maybe it's referring to the mixture, and then it would come out that what? What would it come out? If it was the second pasuk come and tell you the mixture, not women, what would be coming out to tell you? You'd get kos, and that woman would be potter from eating matzah or chametz. Says one mistab koi ba'oichlin ma ba'oichlin koi ba'oichlin ma ba'nechalit bitmir. Would that make any sense? And Rashi explains this a great length what we already mentioned before. The first pasuk says kol machmetzes, all machmetzes. It's referring to the food, so therefore it's referring to the mixture of the food. So we're saying that a mixture of chametz. But the second pasuk is not referring to the food; it's referring to the eaters. Kol oichel machmetzes. Anybody who eats machmetzes is referring to the eaters. Who's the eaters? Even women. So therefore, the first pasuk, which is referring to the food which is being eaten, when the Torah says kol, is coming to include chametz b'taruvas. The second pasuk, which is coming to include everybody who eats chametz, is referring to women. That's what the Gemara says. Says the Gemara, v'chalecha again, maskif lo or nosan avoda of huna v'chalecha. I'm going to find you a pasuk which is referring to a food, and it is referring to, and that we use the word kol, and the kol includes the eaters. Well, Tanya, you have a brisa. There's a part of the animal which is called chelav. Chelav is fat. Fat is the wrong translation for the word chelav because a person is allowed to eat fat on the meat. I can't tell you how many times my children have said to me, you can't eat this whole piece of meat or chicken because there's a tiny bit of fat, some corner of it. You should say, hey, how can that be fat of the chicken or meat? It should be thrown in the bin because it's chelav. No. That says chelav is only the fats that go on the mizbeach. We know which fats, we take away the whole fats that go on the mizbeach. Now, so you might have thought, if the fats which are forbidden to be eaten on the fats go on the mizbeach, so if I've got an animal which is not going to go on the mizbeach, let's say cholin, or let's say it's a bal mum, would I be allowed to eat the fat? Yes. So we need a special riboy to tell you not. Oh, very good. That's it. Well, tell you. Only an animal which is about to be brought to kill. How to do the fat of bal mum? So it says mina behema, didn't say mina behema because it said kol chelev. Oh, chelev chulin minayin. What about the chelev of chulin? Like our animals, our cows, all chulin. Tamudima kol. The koi ba'oichlin is referring to the people eating it, called oichel chelev, all those who eat chelev. The komarba, what we're including the cholim, we're including that which is being eaten. As is a more hosam deleka oichlin, we can't think of anybody to include in eaters. Ma b'nei cholim, we have no choice but to include that which is being eaten. Here, what we don't want to include, there's nobody else to include. So here, that there is to include eaters, we're not going to include that which is being eaten. Again, in the Pasuk, the kol is referring to the eaters. Anybody who eats chelev. And what do we include? Not eaters, but that which is being eaten. Why? Because there's nobody else to include. Who else are you going to include? Women, says Rashi. Women are included already in the pasuk which we had earlier, that there is no logic to include women by chelev, because there's no reason in the world to say that women are part of chelev. Masha'inkin over here where it says koloichel machmetzes, we have a reason to include women. What's the reason to include women? To include women. Why? Because we could have excluded them. Why? Because the Torah puts chametz and matzah together. So if it comes out like this, we have two separate psukim. One pasuk is koloichel machmetzes, is referring to women because it's the pasuk is referring to eaters. And even though it's true that sometimes the pasuk refers to eaters, we include that which is being eaten. That's only when you've got nothing else to include of eaters, you have to include that which is being eaten. But Nashik in the other pasuk, kol machmetzes, is referring to that which is being eaten, which is a tavuvas chametz. It's b'shmak gemor if you've got a cheshbon, a very lot of cheshbon. Now, we said already a few times, the chachamim, what do the chachamim hold? Now you don't get malchus, you don't get kols. Rabbanon, the last way of kol loy dalshi. You don't dash on the word kol. And therefore the word kol doesn't tell us anything. It says, well, if that's the case, so then how do they know that women are not allowed to eat chametz? If they don't dash the word kol to include a mixture of chametz, how do they include women? Says the Gemara, kol darshu, ki kol darshi. The word ki kol is a more. If you look at the pasuk again, the pasuk says kol machmetzes loisachelu with the word kol they don't include. The other pasuk says ki kol oichel chametz. Ki kol oichel machmetzes. The extra ki kol that is including women. Maybe Rabbi Lezer should dash and kol to include women, like we said. Ki kol, the extra, to include the tavuvas. And therefore, what should the halacha be according to Rabbi Lezer? If ki kol is kos, very good. That ki kol includes the mixture, then the mixture is chayav kos, because he should use the word ki kol to include the tavuvas by kol from machmetzes. Says the Gemara, v'chitem ki kol Rabbi Lezer lo'idorish v'tanya. There's a special halacha we're going to go into. It's good to know it. A kohen who brings a mincha is not allowed to put chametz on the mizbeach. We never put chametz in the Beis Hamikdash ever. It's not on the mizbeach except for when. When's the only time we bring a kohen of chametz? So now, what happens if he makes a mincha and a tiny bit of it becomes chametz, and he takes a kometz of it and puts it on the mizbeach? What does he get? Malchus. What happens if he doesn't take a whole kazayis of chametz? He takes half a kazayis of chametz, or he takes bit of the kometz, he mixes it with something else and puts that on the mizbeach. We're going to learn that gets malchus in all of these cases. But Tanya soy not allowed to sacrifice soy. That's the whole kometz. Miksosim minayin tamneva kol a ruva minayin had no mixture tamneva kiko. Man shall say the dosh kol. Who's the one who holds that we dash the word kol? Rabbi Lezer kadosh kiko kasha. It's a kasha. That means more left as a kasha. I mean again, according to Rabbi Lezer, the dash the word kol, which is coming to include women. Ki kol should include the tavuvos that we have kols, and we see that Rabbi Lezer in other places does darshan ki kol, because when it comes to se'oy on the mizbeach, he darshan se'oy on the mizbeach when you put a whole kazayas, you chayav malchus. And if you put a half a kazayas or a mixture of se'oy, you chayav one for the word kol, one for the word ki kol. If that's the case, you should include it for tavuvos. Okay, kasha is kasha. A new topic which relates greatly to this topic, and this topic goes on for some time over that. Called Isuin Shabbatayah, the Heter Mitzdaref le'Issa. Chutz mi'Isuin Nosim. This is a very important halacha because it's so much. Let's say, for example, a person's a Nosim. Is he allowed to eat grapes? No. If he eats grapes, gets malchus. How much does he have to eat to get malchus? That's the halacha with all eating. Nearly all eating, because a few exceptions, in kif, etc. But you're not also kazais. Rashi actually asks the question, how do you measure kazais of wine? Anybody know the answer? It's very easy. You drop a grape. Okay, we'll come to it later. Right. Now let's say he holds a grape, and the grape is less than a kazais. Right? He holds one grape which is less than a kazais, and he takes with it a few pretzels. Is the nozers allowed to eat pretzels? Yes. He takes the grapes and the pretzels together, and they come to be a kazais, and he puts them all in his mouth in one go. Would you give him malchus?
No, not really. No.
I wouldn't. Rashi would. Yes. Rashi says yes. Mitzvah starve. That's what the Gemara says. That's what the Gemara said. Except for nose. Let's say, for example, chaydav. You take a bit of fat and a bit of meat, and you eat together. According to Rabbi Yochanan, would you be chayv malchus? No. Only by nozi. And the Gemara is going to find other exceptions. Tosfos argues with Rashi, and this goes up and again. Now, of course, we're talking about when you mix the pretzels and the grapes together. It can't be that if you take, just because you ate them at the same time, you should be chayv. What you did is, you make the salad of the two together, and you ate them together. But if it's two separate entities, just the fact that you ate it, we'll leave that for a moment. We'll stick with Rashi, because the rest of the Gemara. According to Rashi, you eat a few pretzels and some grapes, and the grapes are not a gazai, you stick them all in your mouth together, you're chayv malchus as nos. Now, how do we know about nos? The Torah says the soaking. That means like this: if you soak your bread into wine and you eat the bread, says the Torah, not allowed to eat it. Now, says Rashi, a beautiful thing which more says actually later. Maybe we're talking about that you soaked your bread into wine, and there's a whole reverse of wine, there's a whole kazais of wine. Who told us that we're talking about that you're including the bread in the equation? What's the answer? You should say it yourself. The pasuk says if you dip your bread into wine, you get malchus. There's more is a raya, the hetas with star for issa, that which is mutter, joins with the issa to get malchus. Says Rashi, oh, very good, there's no chiddush. If we're talking about you dip your bread into wine, and you manage to get so much wine into your bread that there's enough to get malchus just for the wine, so of course you should get malchus, because you drank the wine. Elamai, we're talking about you took a nice slice of bread, you dipped it into the wine, and you only got half the measure of wine, and you ate it with the bread. Now you get malchus. Why do you get malchus? Because the bread is included in the equation, even though you have to have a kazayis. And that's the chiddush. Because if that's not what the Torah meant by mishras, then what in the world was the Torah adding? The Torah must be adding something. So the Torah is adding that you include the bread in the equation. Also, sa'oi, which we mentioned literally 2 minutes ago, that if a person puts on the mizbeach half a kazayis of sa'oi, or mincha, with half a kazayis of not chametz, then he will be chayav. The touch it together, he puts on his back, he'll be chayav malchus. Now, if you remember a second ago, I said that Rashi explains, because indeed the Beis explains that elsewhere, that we're talking about a bit of sa'oi. Here, the Gemara is not saying a bit of sa'oi. The Gemara is saying you took a bit of sa'oi with a bit of non-sa'oi, you put them all on his back together. Keman, krabeleza, the doish kot. Says, boy, Yochi, if so, top of Dalad on Aleph, Nidon Chametz Pesach Nami. Chametz of Pesach, we should have the same halacha, enochanami. Indeed, so a person, for example, on Pesach, who eats a piece of cream cake. Now, the base of the cream cake is chametz, and it's less than a kazais. On the top of it is got on it cream, which adds to a kazais, and he eats the whole piece of cake. According to this, would he get malchus? Yes, he gets malchus according to this. Yes, more complicated, but according to this stage, according to this man, to Omar, he would get malchus. Even though, did he eat a kazais of chametz? No. You only eat half a kazais of chametz, half it's cream. Cream's not chametz, well, it's sugar. I'm going to stop here. What? Yeah, because we had it by chametz, kolech machmetzes. The Gemara says like this, and Rashi says this at more length, and we're stopping over here. Abai understood kol by se'oi is teaching you that if you got se'oi which is less than the kazais, and you put it on the mizbech, you get malchus, even though you didn't put the kazais, because he understands kol means any se'oi, even less than kazais. Says the Gemara that Bavo doesn't agree with him, and Zevi doesn't agree with him. He says no. When the Torah says kol, it doesn't mean that you put less than the kazais in the mizbech. You put half the kazais of se'oi, and at the same time you added to it something else, let's say a kosher matzah, and you put it on this back together, then you chayav. So it comes to machlokes and moiroim. When the Torah says kol se'oi, when you put, a kohen needs to know this, Rav Kohenim here. Chas v'shalom, you're not allowed to put chametz on the mizbeach. If you ever do, get malchus. Only if it's a kazais. Machlokes Abai and other moiroim. According to Abai, if you put less than a kazais, we learn from kol se'oi, they would get malchus. According to Ze'evi, no. Only if it's heter mitzvah for issa, meaning only if you add heter to the less than kazais v'soy and put on his back. Okay, so tomorrow we're going to continue with this fundamental question. When you eat cream cakes, etc., or for example, soup which has got barley inside it, is one getting malchus or not on Pesach? Shkoch. Had a good turnout on tonight. Levi, David, Ian, Ben, have a very good night. Stop with that. The difference doesn't exist.
Bye.